Highland Park, Michigan. What on earth happened here? That might be what you end up asking yourself while watching this video. The only positive things to mention about this town is the history, or what the town was like 100 years ago. Highland Park used to be a really nice city. It used to be called the City of Trees, as the residential blocks were full of elm trees. But in the 1970s, a mad case of Dutch elm disease forced most of the trees throughout the city to be removed. Today, there are large sections of town where there are hardly any trees, or buildings for that matter. Highland Park was once home to a large middle-class population, and it used to be home to the headquarters of one of the most recognizable American car brands, along with thousands of factory jobs that used to provide many families with a comfortable middle-class lifestyle. But today, Highland Park is one of the worst cities in all of America, and we'll get into the details of what happened here throughout the rest of this video. I begin the video in the outskirts of Hamtramck. We're going to drive through the city limits of Detroit a little bit before we get inside of Highland Park. However, once we get there, you'll see that nearly every residential block is full of urban blight. Half of the traffic lights don't work, and you'll see that driving on many of Highland Park's streets are like driving on the moon. Much of Michigan roads are that way, you might think, and definitely throughout the city of Detroit, but it's on a different level in Highland Park, people. Currently, we're just southeast of Highland Park, and Highland Park is a city that's entirely within the city limits of Detroit, except for a very small part of the southeast that borders Hamtramck, which is another city that sits entirely within Detroit. For a video on Hamtramck, make sure to check out my Detroit playlist. With that said, this will be my 11th video in my Detroit series where I end up going through the entire city. Highland Park once again isn't to be confused with being a neighborhood of Detroit, as it's its own city. There's not much of a difference though between the residential areas of Highland Park and a lot of the nearby residential areas of Detroit, or what used to be residential areas. Anyway, this guy here, he's a big deal around here. Trust me, I know. Met him the other day. He's got places to go, people to go see. He don't care about nobody's feelings, alright? See, like I said, I know what I'm talking about. None of us are on that guy's level, clearly.
I'm on his level. You're not, because you're obviously not from here. That's how we roll here in Highland Park. And by the way, your video sucks.
Oh yes. Yes, you again. We all know that you're a proven winner in life. You're most certainly on that guy's level. In fact, we should all strive to be like you one day. It's an accomplishment that most of us can only wish to ever achieve. Well, anyway, on to more serious things now, because we're here to talk about Highland Park. Right now we're driving through an industrial area of town. There's still a few factories that we just passed by along Oakland Avenue, and Highland Park is a very small city. The city has just under 3 square miles of land area. To the left is the old high school football field, and the high school used to sit on the opposite side of the field from where we are. The school was closed following the 2014-2015 school year, and it was demolished shortly afterwards. The mascot was the polar bears. Shows you just how much a town has fallen when it can't find the funds to have its own high school. Along with much of Detroit, razor blade fences are a common sight throughout Highland Park, just like the one that you see here to the right. The problem with Highland Park over time has been the fact that the entire town has suffered from many of the same issues that you see throughout Detroit's inner-city neighborhoods. Issues such as gang violence, high violent and property crime rates, drugs and arsons, not to mention a strong history of political corruption. The difference is that Detroit, despite all of its major issues, and it does have them, is that Detroit is a very large spread out city, with a downtown area that supports major company headquarters and plenty of other office jobs, and not to mention the thousands of industrial jobs that are still within the city limits of Detroit. All of those large offices and industrial spaces provides Detroit with millions of tax dollars in revenue every year. Highland Park, on the other hand, doesn't have a fancy downtown, and it barely has any industrial jobs left. And as time has gone on, tax revenue has only been harder to come by for the city of Highland Park as it continues its strong economic downward spiral. Highland Park wasn't always this way though, as during the town's heyday when it was home to thousands of automotive jobs, Highland Park was thought of as the model American city. The town was incorporated in 1918 to avoid being annexed by Big Bad Detroit. As Highland Park grew, so did the areas of Detroit nearby. In those days, Highland Park supported a large middle-class population. The town didn't have much crime and the public schools were thought to have been some of the best in the country. However, those days didn't last very long for Highland Park, as the town hit a peak population of nearly 53,000 back in 1930. As you can see, Highland Park followed the same trend as Detroit, with a mass exodus of jobs and population starting around 1960. Reasons for that included the Detroit riots, which encouraged white flight, the Ford plant ceased operations in 1974, and Chrysler, which was founded in Highland Park and had their headquarters in town for a long time, ended up moving their headquarters to the suburb of Auburn Hills, 25 miles north. Ironically, to the right you have a row of some really nice homes off of McNichols. However, they all have a Detroit address. Directly behind the row of homes to the right is the Detroit Golf Club, and there's actually some really nice Detroit neighborhoods that many of you might not expect just west of here. We can get into more of those nice neighborhoods in a separate video as I continue on with my Detroit series. Going back to the loss of automotive jobs in Highland Park, those moves by the auto giants in Chrysler and Ford hit Highland Park pretty hard, as they provided much of the city's tax revenue. As crime continued to be at an all-time high throughout the 20th century, all of the people that could afford to leave Highland Park did, as they found a better quality of life in the suburbs. That left Highland Park with a mostly impoverished population. To the right is the abandoned Liberty School. The building first opened as a school back in 1917, but it closed in 1997 as enrollment was at an all-time low. The school reopened in 2000 under the name of Liberty Academy, but it closed again in 2006. The Highland Park School District was once made up of 9 different schools, but today the district is down to only one school, which serves students from K through 8. As the population continued to shrink over the years in Highland Park, the school district found itself in financial deficits. Several different emergency managers were appointed by the state of Michigan to run Highland Park's school district over the years. Not much you can do, though, to save things if people are continuing to move out of the city as they have. Moving on towards other city government functions, there's been a lot of troubling news over the last couple of decades regarding the city's police department. In late 2021, Highland Park hired Johnny Thomas as its new police chief. Thomas was a former commander with the Detroit Police Department that has a record of drunk driving. He left the Detroit Police Department upon crashing a department-issued vehicle while drunk back in 2019. Back in 2017, a report came out stating that Highland Park police officers were some of the lowest-paid officers in the nation, and that many of them had to work a side hustle in order to make enough money to comfortably live off of. Many of the vehicles used by the city are old, but there aren't enough funds to purchase new police vehicles. With that said, just do a Google search for Highland Park, Michigan police officers and you'll find dozens of stories that include members of the department acting in ways that they shouldn't, like this story from 2021, where an officer lost his job from an incident in Dearborn. Meanwhile, this is Hamilton Avenue, and it's obvious that this thoroughfare has seen better days. Since I filmed this video, Hamilton Avenue has actually seen a road diet, in which they reduce the lanes for automobile traffic and add bike lanes. Anyway, in 2021, the Mackinac Center Legal Foundation, which is a huge law firm in the state of Michigan, filed a lawsuit against the city of Highland Park after the city refused to provide the salary of a police officer that was accused of illegal activity. That activity included forging documents attached to vehicle owners and taking part in a bribery scheme from a local towing company, in which he provided false reports to get vehicles improperly towed away to make both himself and the towing company a lot of money. Most recently, Highland Park is thought to be responsible for an increase in water bills across all of Metro Detroit, as they haven't been paying their water bills. That's bound to make people upset. The reason why Highland Park not paying their water bills results in everybody else paying for it is because southeastern Michigan gets its water from the Great Lakes Water Authority, which is a regional government agency that supplies water to Detroit and all of its suburbs. Since Highland Park is so far in debt on its water bills, among other things, the way that the Great Lakes Water Authority decided to make up for the deficit is to increase the rates for everybody else that's using their water. Water bills ended up being increased by 3.7%, in which half of it is due to Highland Park not paying its bills, as it said that the city is in a $10 million deficit in paying for water, and another $40 million in sewer fees. And that's only for water, people. You have to wonder what other debt the city has that's weighing on its shoulders. Really quick though, not sure if you noticed this as we just entered the city limits of Detroit, and back there we went from being on a street that looked like the surface of the moon to being on an actually decent street once we entered the Detroit city limits. Same dilemma here as we re-enter Highland Park. Just shows you how hard it is for Highland Park to keep up with its own infrastructure. Anyway, going back to talking about the city's debt, considering that people are continuing to leave Highland Park at an extremely high rate, with no momentum swing in sight, taking all of the tax dollars with them, I wouldn't be surprised if the city of Highland Park is forced to file for bankruptcy in the near future. And before we get into some of the city's stats, here's a refresher to just show you how many people have left Highland Park since its 1930 peak of nearly 53,000 people. Today, Highland Park is home to just under 9,000 residents, and the median household income is $18,000 per year, making it the poorest city in the country. And no, that's not me being extreme or dramatic. Highland Park really is the poorest city in the country based off of reported median household income for cities that have over 5,000 people. Only 10% of adults 25 and older hold a bachelor's degree or higher, and 1 out of every 4 residents 25 and older failed to graduate high school. The median value of owner-occupied housing units is only $45,000, and the poverty rate is reported to be at 46.5%, but with a median household income of only $18,000 per year, I have a hard time finding that poverty rate is under 50%. But all of these numbers are coming from the official US Census website, and you can't get more official numbers than that. Also, I'll add that it's hard to make stats like these look good for the city of Detroit, but Detroit looks like heaven compared to Highland Park. You can see the averages here for Wayne County and the United States as well. Here's a look at some of the houses that we just passed along this street, which is like night and day for most other parts of Highland Park that we've seen in this video so far. There's a few other streets in Highland Park that look nice like this, and the whole city probably used to look nice like this, but not anymore. Anyway, Niche.com doesn't even have a ranking for how either good or bad the public schools are in Highland Park, as the public schools in this city have basically become a thing of the past. Most families have to send their kids to Detroit public schools. Now it's time to move on to the crime stats, and oh boy, does Highland Park have some crime. The violent crime rates in Highland Park are nearly 2,000 for every 100,000 residents. However, the property crime rates are closer to the national average rates. But I think that most of us are thinking the same thing, in that most of the property crime in this town goes unreported, and there's multiple stories out there that explain how families in Highland Park are looking for justice from long unsolved murders, so I wouldn't be looking too much into those low property crime rate numbers. This place is dangerous. On this street, you can sort of get a glimpse of what the city might have used to look like when it was known as the City of Trees, as this street has more trees than the other streets that we've been on so far. Here's a random side note, as several movies have shot some scenes inside of the Highland Park city limits, most notably Eminem's 8 Mile movie where they set a house on fire. That was a real house that was set on fire in Highland Park for that movie. It was the cause of controversy when it happened, as residents were upset, and they said that the town didn't need another burned down house. The filming company then came back and razed the abandoned house that they burned down and filmed for the movie, and they paid for the costs associated for it, and they also made a donation to the city of Highland Park. Arsons have calmed down in recent years, but they still occur. Highland Park, along with the city of Detroit, had become notorious for arsons over the years, most notably with the night before Halloween, which is called Devil's Night. To the left here is St. Benedict Church, which was opened in 1915. In 2014, the church closed, and now it's called the Soul Harvest Ministries Cathedral. And now we're going to be heading down the main street in Highland Park, which is Woodward Avenue, and here I'll start talking about some of the history that once made Highland Park a special place. Back in 1909, the first mile-long stretch of concrete pavement in the country was used along Woodward Avenue, between McNichols and 7 Mile. McNichols is often referred to as 6 Mile. Technically, that stretch of Woodward Avenue is in the city limits of Detroit, but given the fact that 6 Mile or McNichols serves as the northern boundary for Highland Park, it sits right outside of Highland Park. To the left is where Highland Park High School used to be. Today you can see the turnaround driveway area that led to the school. And here is a Google Street View shot of the school from October of 2015, which was right before the school was demolished. Highland Park High School closed after the 2014-2015 school year due to low enrollment, and the city could no longer justify the funding for keeping the school open. As we cross underneath this railroad overpass, there's a large shopping center to the left that's called the Model T Plaza. For those who don't know, the Model T was the first car model to go through mass production along an assembly line, and Highland Park is often referred to as the birthplace of the assembly line, as it was here that the first assembly line was implemented at a factory. The entire shopping area that you see here today used to be occupied by the Highland Park Ford plant. Henry Ford opened the plant in 1910 at the corner of Woodward and Manchester, and at the time, it was the largest plant in the world. In 1914, Henry Ford offered a wage of $5 a day, which at the time made thousands of people flock towards Highland Park to get in on the deal. And that's what made Highland Park and the surrounding areas of Detroit see massive population growth. The Model T was manufactured here through 1927. After that, automobile production was moved to the River Rouge plant in Dearborn. This plant was still used in many ways, though, for making tractors and other auto parts. The Highland Park plant also helped build tanks and aircraft engine parts during World War II. Originally, the Highland Park Ford plant was made up of quite a few different buildings, and over time, the facility started to be used less and less. Some of the space was starting to be leased out by Ford, and by the 1960s, some of the buildings were being demolished. There was actually a power plant attached to the facility, but it was demolished in 1960. In 1973, the Highland Park Ford plant was listed on the National Register of Historic Places. In 1974, all production at the facility ended. Ford still used some of the space for storage up until 2012. With that said, Highland Park played a significant role in what we know the American life to be today. Owning a car or leasing one is needed almost anywhere that you live in this country. The United States is a country that was built for cars. It all started here, in good old Highland Park, Michigan. The city has fallen harder than almost any other city in this country, and its glory days were short-lived, but the invention of the assembly line allowed for mass production of cars, and that helped most families be able to afford one. Before that, it was much more expensive to build cars, and only the 1%ers were able to afford a car. There's even more history facts to state here, as in 1942, the first urban freeway was built in Highland Park, which is the Davison Freeway, and we'll cross over it up ahead. The freeway was built below street level just like most of the other freeways were built throughout Detroit. And while I'm in the midst of talking about the history of Highland Park that once made this place great, it's just so hard to ignore the amount of abandoned storefronts along Woodward Avenue as we continue to head south. Hopefully the development that's occurring along Woodward Avenue between Highland Park and downtown in the Detroit city limits can eventually bleed into the city limits of Highland Park a little bit, because this place could use some hope like that. And yes, a lot of the storefronts at the Model T shopping plaza were occupied, and so were a lot of the stores in the Woodward Place shopping center on the opposite side of the Model T plaza, but it's just so hard to ignore what we're seeing right here. And here we're crossing over the Davison Freeway, the first urban freeway built in the United States back in 1942. The idea to upgrade what was once Davison Avenue into a freeway came from the fact that Davison Avenue was once a heavily congested roadway, and surveys at the time showed that most of the traffic was trying to pass through Highland Park on their way from point A to point B, and that's what encouraged the idea to build the Davison Freeway. Well, I will say this, I'm somebody that roots for the city of Detroit and southeastern Michigan. I'm definitely a homer when it comes to the state of Michigan, and I will speak positively about Michigan more than I will about other states to a fault. I think that everybody's like that to an extent about their hometown, their home area. But I will say this, I've seen a lot of towns throughout the Midwest and throughout the United States of America. I've seen a lot of streets. As I turn the corner, this upcoming stretch of street might be the most depressing looking street that I have ever seen. To the left here is what was the original Highland Park High School. The newer location was built off of Woodward back in 1977. After a few years of being vacant, Highland Park Community College moved in sometime in the 1980s. The community college closed, however, back in 1996, and then the building was used by the Highland Park Career Academy. In 2009, the Career Academy closed on short notice, as the city just couldn't justify keeping the school open with continued population decline throughout Highland Park. And now, the building has been vacant for about 13 years. And then you have this vacant fortress sitting right across from the school. And to the left here, it looks like you have a health clinic that might still be used to some capacity, but past it is an abandoned parking garage. And from here I transition to a spot where I drive south on Hamilton Avenue, and if the city isn't careful, Hamilton Avenue might look like Glendale Avenue does in the near future. It already looks pretty bad. And I skip the video ahead to yet again another large abandoned structure in Highland Park. This one is on 3rd Avenue and Highland Street. You actually have 3 massive abandoned buildings here. One of them is a power plant, another is what used to be a homeless shelter, and another was recently used as a school, as it was called Best Academy. Before that, it was used as a part of a hospital. And this street used to be full of mid-rise apartment buildings. You still have one larger abandoned one up here on the right, but most of it has been cleared out by now. Here I skip the video ahead to where you can actually see some abandoned pedestrian tunnels over to the right. Believe it or not, 2nd Avenue used to be congested with traffic back in the heyday of Highland Park, and it was considered to be safer for pedestrians to cross the street through these pedestrian tunnels rather than walk across at a crosswalk. This tunnel was probably constructed around the 1920s or the 30s, and they've been sitting here unused for decades. Because as you can see, traffic is definitely not congested on 2nd Avenue these days in good old Highland Park. Lastly, I wanted to head through what is the Stevens Subdivision Historic District, which was added to the National Register of Historic Places back in 1988. When these homes were built, they were full of middle-class, blue-collar, hard-working families. Now, there always seems to be a handful of people who get really upset with me when I make videos on cities and towns that are struggling economically, and oftentimes they'll twist things around and say that I'm making it sound like everyone that lives in a place is a criminal, which I never said once throughout the video of Highland Park that I just made, or that I'm a part of the problem for saying that I'm doing nothing but talking trash about a town, which is not true because I mentioned all of the positive history that this place has, or that I'm saying that the entire town is abandoned and that I don't show any of the nicer homes, which is also not true because I've shown some nicer homes earlier in the video and I'm showing them now, but let's be honest, about 75% of the town is abandoned. Now, sometimes I'll get death threats or people sending me long emails or DMs on social media asking me to take a video down or whatever. For those who might be angry with me, who might live in Highland Park or have family that lives in Highland Park, let's be honest. I'm saying information that has been reported by multiple news outlets and publications over the years. I'm not saying anything new. So if you're a resident of Highland Park and you're upset with me for making this video, do you get just as angry at the journalists who work for the NBCs and ABCs of the world when they report on the bad things about Highland Park? If so, I just want you to ask yourself what you have done to make your community better. If you're a parent, have you been the best parent that you can be? If you're in school, are you doing the absolute best that you can to succeed in school to give yourself the best chance at living a good life? Data shows that 1 out of every 4 Highland Park adults 25 and older haven't even graduated high school, and that's a deeper issue and more complex issue than what this video is about right here. And I say this because it seems as if there's oftentimes a good amount of people that try to blame me for a town being the way that it is. They display their anger at me for showing what the town looks like today. But if you're someone who has taken care of all of their own personal responsibilities of being a good parent or being a good son, a good daughter, or a good student, and you have devoted time and energy in trying to make a difference in Highland Park to make the town a better place, you're the type of people that this world needs more of, and the type of people that Highland Park needs more of. And if that is you, I truly hope that your community gives you the respect that you deserve. Meanwhile, I do end the video here, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure to drop a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, as doing all of those things helps these videos destroy the evil monster that is the YouTube algorithm. Also make sure to hit that notification bell and select yes, so that you can be notified every time that I upload a new video. If you enjoyed this video, then you might enjoy checking out some of the featured playlists on this channel. Videos on other places like what you saw here can be found in my Detroit playlist, my Michigan playlist, or in my American Hoods playlist. Last but not least, if you can't get enough of me on here, you can always go follow me on my other social media accounts, and those links are below. We'll see you next time. Peace!